As dusk fell over the camp on Ambria, Darth Bane reached out toward the tiny crystal pyramid he'd carefully positioned on the small pedestal in the center of the otherwise empty tent. Moving slowly, he brushed his fingers gently against its cold, dead surface, then pulled his hand back when he saw it tremble. An instant later, his fingers started twitching spasmodically as tingling jolts of sharp pain laced their way from his elbow down to his wrist. Swearing a silent oath, he gritted his teeth and closed his eyes, trying to ride it out. Because of the obelisks that encased his body, he was used to living in constant pain. It was always there, a dull throbbing just above the level of subconscious awareness. Normally, he could shut it out, bearing the torments of his infestation with no visible effects. However, if he wasn't careful, if he pushed himself too far, the physical demands could overwhelm him. The tremor had been a warning, the first sign that he was reaching the edges of his endurance. 3 times before, he had attempted to create his own Sith Holocron, and each time the project had ended in failure. He wasn't about to fail this time. He knew that one false move at this stage and all his work, literally years of preparation, would be undone. Yet he also knew that he had no choice but to find a way to deal with the pain and continue his work. He had made his first attempt 5 years before. Using Frida Nat's Holocron as a blueprint, he had recreated the intricate matrix of lattices and vertices that were the key to storing nearly infinite amounts of knowledge in a data system small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. It had taken months to gather and fashion the rare crystals into the filaments and fibers of the interlaced network, followed by weeks of delicate and painstaking adjustments. The matrix had to fall within highly exacting specifications, and Bane had spent hundreds of hours making thousands of precise subatomic alterations through the power of the Force to ensure that each crystalline strand was properly in place. Once the crystal matrix inside the Holocron was ready, he had carefully transcribed the ancient symbols of Sith power onto the pyramid's surface. The markings were part of a powerful ritual that was critical to maintaining the stability of the matrix after it was infused with the energies of the dark side. Unfamiliar with the exact purpose or meaning of the arcane glyphs, Darth Bane had once again used Nad's Holocron as his guide, studying the markings etched on the surface, then copying them exactly on his own creation. But when he tried to activate the Holocron by channeling his power through it, the matrix imploded, collapsing in on itself and reducing the artifact to a pile of glimmering dust in a crackling white flash. He tried again several months later, only to be met with the exact same result. Forced to admit that the secret of crafting holocrons was still beyond him, Bane had begun a campaign to discover everything he could about the powerful talismans. With Xana's aid, he accumulated a vast wealth of knowledge on the subject. He devoured every data card, historical account, and personal memoir he could find that theorized on the steps needed to create one of the fiendishly complex pyramids. He came across thousands of veiled references to, and hundreds of theoretical speculations on, the art of crafting a holocron. However, he was unable to find a single source that explicitly set out the spells and rituals required, and their secrets still eluded him. Bane refused to give up. He continued his research, seeking out rare tomes, hidden documents, and forbidden works of lore. It took 3 more years until he learned the purpose and meaning behind the glyphs, and in doing so, he found an answer to why his first efforts had failed. He discovered that each holocron was emblazoned with symbols that were uniquely tied to the Sith Lord responsible for the artifact's creation. The miniature pyramids were far more than a simple collection of raw data. Learning was imparted through the wisdom of a gatekeeper, an advanced simulated personality that mimicked the creator's own identity. The right combination of symbols, applied in conjunction with specific sorceries and spells of the ancient Sith, would allow Bane to capture his appearance, knowledge, and cognitive processes. Within the structure of the holocron, they would be transformed into a 3-dimensional hologram to guide and direct anyone who used the artifact. The cognitive network that fueled the Gatekeeper also stabilized the interwoven lattices and vertices of the Matrix, keeping it from collapsing as it had done on Bane's previous attempts. Armed with this new understanding, Bane had made a third attempt to create his own holocron 2 years ago. He had proceeded carefully. The rituals of invocation required to divine and inscribe the proper symbols onto the pyramid surface were mentally and physically exhausting. Ever wary of making a mistake, he had drawn the process out over 2 long weeks. Ironically, his caution proved to be his undoing. As he began manipulating the inner structures of the crystal matrix during the final phase of the project, he sensed that the power of the symbols had faded. The cognitive network of the Gatekeeper had degraded to the point that it lacked the ability to support and stabilize the matrix. In desperation, he had sought some way to restore it, only to realize his efforts were futile. Enraged at yet another failure, he had crushed the useless pyramid to dust with his bare hands. Before beginning his 4th and most recent attempt, Bane had vowed that he would not fail again. Time was the real key. He had to finish aligning the Matrix and infuse it with his dark side energies within a few days, before the cognitive functions of the Gatekeeper began to degrade. Now, after months of gathering the rare materials, weeks of meditations to focus his power, and 3 straight days and nights of intense focus and concentration, he was finally nearing the end. Only a few dozen minor adjustments still needed to be made, but Bane was keenly aware that time was running out. 3 days of constantly drawing upon the Force without food or respite had left him exhausted in body, mind, and spirit. He was particularly vulnerable to the obelisks in this state. Normally, they fed off the dark side energies that naturally flowed through him. But the creation of the Holocron demanded that he channel all his power directly into his work. The parasites were slowly starving, and in response, they were flooding his bloodstream with chemicals and hormones intended to drive him into a mindless fury so they could gorge themselves on the dark side as he unleashed his rage. The spasming muscles of his hand and fingers were a direct result of their efforts, and there was nothing Bane could do but wait for the tremor to pass. He had only a few hours left to complete his work, yet he couldn't risk making a mistake and damaging the delicately interwoven crystal fibers of the Holocron's internal structure. Slowly, he was able to reassert control over his convulsing digits, rueing each precious second that slipped away as he did so. When his hand at last became still, he took a slow, deep breath to refocus his mind, then reached out with the Force to touch the Matrix once more. A ribbon of electric blades raveled itself around the muscles and nerves of his spine, causing him to arch backward as he screamed in agony. The pain momentarily broke his concentration, and an uncontrollable surge of dark side energy shot through him and into the Holocron. An instant later, it exploded, spraying Bane with a shower of crystal fragments and dust. For several seconds, he simply stared at the empty pedestal, feeling the pulsing hunger of the obelisks and his own gathering rage. A red veil fell across his vision, and Darth Bane surrendered himself to the fury.